All right, today we're going to talk about stasis theory. Particularly, I'm going to give a toy example of stasis theory in order to explain how it works, particularly in regards to science and engineering writing. So stasis theory, as a quick reminder, is essentially a 2,500-year-old form of pre-writing exercise. It's a way of thinking about what are the questions that you need to ask for your audience to agree with you in order to be able to make the case or the point that you're trying to make. So what questions might they disagree with that you're going to need to explain to them? And for science and engineering, and keep in mind, stasis can work in a lot of different fields. For example, in journalism, who, what, when, and where are sort of their core stasis questions. But for science writing and engineering, we take a more classical view and we ask the questions based around what, how, and why. Specifically, what are the facts, what are the definitions, how do causations work, and why is it important, and why or what are we going to do about it? So that comes down to facts, definition, causation, value, is this good or bad, and policy, what's going to be done about it. So let's take a look, like I said, at a toy example that can kind of illustrate what it is that I'm talking about here. So I'm going to start with the baseball cap. And let's go with a little bit of facts. We can observe that there is a brim along the front. The brim does not go all the way around the hat. We can observe that there is a logo, that the baseball hat is sort of tan and tannish gray on it. So those are some observable facts about this baseball hat. Now, if I take another baseball hat, we can see that it has a brim along the front. It has a different color. This is more of a purple, and there's a logo on the front, logo on the side as well. So some similarities, some differences that are observable facts about these hats. Take another hat. This has a brim. It's got a little tear there on the brim, very cute. It's got a logo on it, and this one is sort of a navy blue. So some similarities, some differences that we can clearly observe in these hats. And typically, we want to say that observable facts are not necessarily things that we can argue about within the stases. In science, we do have some discussion about facts when it comes to measurability. So if I was to measure this with my hand and say it is about half a hand length, or if I was to measure this with a measuring tape and get a set of centimeters, or measure it with a laser and get an even smaller unit of measurement, that precision of fact is something that we could discuss. But by and large, observable facts, if we can agree upon the form of measurement and evaluation, are things that are observable, typically non-arguable. Typically. So, one more. We've got another baseball cap. This has a similar logo to the first, slightly different color, a little bit more worn. It's an older cap, and it also has a brim on the front. So we've got 4 hats. We'll call these baseball caps, which will get us to definition here in just a minute. But we've got a lot of observable facts about the logos, the brims, and the color on these hats. So let's take a look at definition here. Let us introduce this hat. So this hat is a little bit different in its facts. We've got a brim, but this brim goes all the way around the hat. Its shape is slightly different. We can observe the indentations on the top that is not the same as with the other hats. It's also a different color. And we might put this here. Now, here's the thing with definition. It's probably a closed stasis, something that we can largely think our audience is going to agree with, that these are all hats. But definition also allows us to subcategorize through abstraction. So now I can say these are baseball caps, and this is, let's call it a fedora. That name may be a little bit more open to debate in our stasis, but for now, let's say that this is a fedora, and these are 4 baseball caps. So what I can do at this point is I can abstract away some of the facts and compare across these. So if I say that fedoras have brims all the way along the hat, whereas baseball caps only have along the front, then I don't have to say that every time I'm talking about these definitions. We can accept that the baseball caps have brims on the front and probably some sort of logo on the front atop the brim, and fedoras have a brim that goes all the way around, and we just accept that as part of the definition within this subgroup. Another thing that definitions allow us to do, which is extraordinarily important, is exclude. So, we can safely say, this is probably not a hat. I think that most of us are going to agree that this is not a hat of any form or fashion. It is, in fact, a scarf. So, I'm going to take this scarf, and I'm going to put it over here, and this scarf is now an excluded category from hats. So we have hats, baseball caps, and fedoras. And we could, continue along these lines. I could introduce a more controversial element here. I could introduce these bandanas, and certainly I could attempt to wear one as a hat. That was a pretty bad attempt there, but nonetheless, this might be more of an open stasis as to definitionally if that a hat or not. And I would understand that I would have a much harder time arguing with my audience that these are in fact hats, and I would have to put a lot more work and a lot more hedging into my explanation. Okay, so now let's talk about causation. Let's say that I wanted to go outside and it was raining. So in that case, if I was to wear, I'm going to take the MIT hat here, the newest MIT hat, and I'm going to say that if I know that it is raining, then I know that the brim would be able to prevent some of the rain from hitting me on the head. So I can think about time in regards to what's going to happen in the future, sequence of events, basic causative logic, which I think we all have a pretty good grasp of. But I can then say how the facts interact with the object itself. So if the rain's coming in, the brim, which we've discussed, is going to protect from some of that rain. I could say that this brim would protect the front and the side. If it's coming in straight on, then I'm not going to be very well protected. But this brim is going to have a broader range of protection than the baseball caps. Now, I'm just describing sort of the causal relation here. Notice that I'm not giving any evaluative language. I'm not saying it's better that the baseball caps are doing or it's better what the fedora is doing. I'm simply explaining some of the causative elements. And in this case, this non-hat would likely get soaked and would not necessarily protect from the rain. And the same for our bandanas. If we think that these are hats, they would also, because they are cloth, would also get soaked in the rain. So that's a bit of an understanding of how the causative elements come into play. Now let's talk about quality. What is good and what is bad? In that case, now I can evaluate. So in evaluation, I might say, regardless of whether they are hat or not, these are going to get soaked and would not be good to wear in the rain. This appears that it would likely give me better protection in the rain because of the broader range of brim and protection, and in some cases it's a little bit more solid than some of these caps, and that the front brim might not protect. None of these are maybe ideal for wearing in the rain, but I can say from an evaluation standpoint, this is probably the best hat in providing protection from the rain. And that then would naturally bring us to the final stasis, that of policy. What would we do? If I were to wear a hat in the rain, then I would choose this hat. And I would do so because evaluatively, based on value, I believe that it is the best hat at the causative element of protecting my head from the rain because it is a hat that has a brim and the right observable features for doing so. And that is the crux of just a checklist, essentially, that I have marked off all of the elements of stasis that are of concern. And by and large, most of these I think would be closed stasis. In this case, the factual elements of the brim, there'd be no real arguments that this is a hat. The fact that it would protect me from the rain would probably be the most open question, that causative element of what kind of rain we're talking about. The rain aspect would probably need to be defined a bit more in order to be able to truly win over an audience. But most of the elements of the hat would be very closed. Now, that is not always the case. Frequently, you're going to be making, particularly in scientific arguments, the more interesting questions are the open questions. new research explores new causative elements. There may be new evaluations, new motivations for why we're doing research that need to be argued. So frequently it's the open questions that we have to pay more attention to. And so let's just play around with that for a second. And let's say that I wanted to argue that the hat I wanted to wear in the rain is this boy right here. So if I was to wear this in the rain, and I was to argue that this is the best hat to wear in the rain, then I would have to go back and look at all the arguments that came before, and I'd have a really, really tough climb ahead of me. There's no brim on this hat, so a lot of what we've talked about from the protective features of the rain, this hat does not have. What it does have is a lot of coverage, which the other hats do not have. So it covers the back of my head, and it covers a fair bit of my face. So is that coverage going to be better? And is this even a hat? We haven't looked at a no-brim hat, and we would have to be able to establish whether helms are in fact a subcategory of hat, or whether they are a completely different class on their own. So in this case, we'd have a lot more open questions and have to spend a great deal more time establishing all of the Stasis one by one than we might if we were arguing for the fedora. And that is a basic toy example of walking through Stasis as a checklist and understanding what your open and closed questions are in making an argument. Thank you very much.